Welcome to this week's episode of the Liberty Unveiled podcast, formerly the Yeshua Unveiled podcast. I am your host, Brad Hopp, and I'm joined by my friend and co-host, Pastor Sam Jones. Together, we are unveiling liberty one episode at a time. We'll be discussing the latest in trafficking news, insider stories from those being delivered, and studying the Founders Bible to learn how to return America to sanity and true freedom. Our sponsor for today's show is Teshua Tea Company. Visit teshuatea.com or deliverancetea.com. Hi, guys, and welcome to the Liberty Unveiled podcast. I'm your host, Brad Hopp, and as you can tell, my friend Pastor Sam was able to virtually join me today. So we're going to do this a little different style than normal. We're going to do this via Zoom, and so it'll be a little different format than normal. But anyway, so any thoughts on all that, Pastor Sam?
Yeah, well, I mean, I should tell everybody that I was planning on being there, but you said you're going to make me wear a mask, and so I said,
Yeah,
we
right.
better just social distance then. No, just kidding about that. Yeah, I couldn't quite make it down today, but I'm glad we were able to do it virtually because it feels like it's been a couple millennia. I mean, when you're talking 2020 and 2021 time frame, 3 weeks or 4 weeks or whatever it was. I mean, that's a couple centuries.
Yeah, it really is. It feels like it. Yeah, and it's just been crazy. I don't know how your Christmas was, but for us, the whole thing was just bonkers as far as time goes.
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty crazy. I'll put it this way: before Christmas, I had one white hair in my beard. After Christmas, my wife counted I had 5.
Oh,
so
really?
I don't know what that means.
I've got a few more than 5, so I'm still a little bit ahead of you. That's funny. Maybe shed some light on the subject. So anyway, so how was your Christmas?
It was good. It was good. We kind of went. I mean, we don't have to travel real far, which is really nice. My in-laws live about 10 minutes away, 15 minutes away, something like that. And then my parents live about an hour away, so we did go down there or over there. And so that was a good time, able to do some traveling. And, it's always a little bit more fun with the kids
Right.
to do Christmas. It's interesting too, the different, I don't want to say worldviews, but the different traditions. That's the word I'm looking for. When you start off a family, and growing up, my grandma would come to our house at like 3:30 in the morning every Christmas day, and we'd be having Christmas by 4 a.m. I mean,
wow.
It was, as a kid, it was awesome. Even as a teenager, I thought it was awesome.
Parents are going, Mom.
Yeah, I don't know if they thought it was awesome. But my wife, they were a little bit more of the sleep in kind of stuff. And so a little different on that. But our kid, he's, 2 years old. And so he actually slept in because it was a, long, stressful day of on Christmas Eve with cousins and family and stuff like that. So he slept in, and, I was sitting there at 4 a.m, like, come on, everybody wake up.
That's funny. We did Hanukkah
How'd it go for you?
We did Hanukkah this year, and then we did,
So you got Chinese food on Christmas Day? Is that how that works?
We didn't have Chinese. No. No, but so we did Hanukkah this year, and that was really cool. It was interesting. It's the first year that we've ever done it, so kind of muddling our way through it and stuff, but it was still fun. And then we had Thanksgiving here, and then we had Christmas here too and stuff. And our Christmas is a little bit different. We do a sock hunt every year. And so our sock hunt, it started back in 2009, and it's just this crazy. I don't even know how I came up with it, but actually I do, because I found some lumps of coal that year out here on our farm, and so I'm like, I'm going to take these and I'm going to hide them in their socks. And actually, I'm going to replace their socks with some old black sports socks that I had. They were just crusty and old and threadbare and spots, holes in them, and just, they were clean, but they were gross, And so I hung the coal inside, or put the coal inside the socks, and then I had a little tiny note folded up inside the sock and hung the socks up in place of their Christmas socks, you know. And then so one clue led to the next one, that led to the next one, and you had to go find the clues and then find the sock and stuff. And it went over so big that it became a tradition for the last 11 years now. And this year I kind of,
That's cool.
Yeah, it is. It's a lot of fun, but this year I kind of weaseled out on it a little bit, because I had run a fire truck to Carson, Washington, just outside, like an hour outside of Portland, the day before Christmas. And so I flew home Christmas Eve. And so I'm like, all right, you guys got to help me out with the clues, because I'm to the point now where I have to write like almost 70 clues. And so it takes forever. It literally takes me like 4 or 5 hours to write the clues, to hide the socks, to do all this stuff. And I'm like, okay, you guys have got to help me out with this. And so they did. Evelyn and Harrison both stepped up to the plate and helped out and wrote clues. And Mom and Faith, several of them helped out in writing clues and stuff. So it made it a lot more fun, a lot more easy for me.
Good.
Yeah, so.
Man, I'm sitting there thinking like, man, 3 or 4 clues, that's good enough. Over 70 clues?
Almost, yeah. Last year I think I had like 66 or something, 67. I don't remember. Somewhere. Wow. It was in the 60s that I had to write. And so that means you got to come up with hiding spots for all those clues. And it'll be like, Huh?
Well, can you get a drink of your coffee real quick?
Sure.
It makes sense now. It makes sense now. Oh man, that's yeah.
It's fun because it slows everything down. The Gordons, our pastors, their family tradition is everybody sits around, gets their presents out, and boom, 5 minutes later you're done. It's just everybody tears into their presents all at once, and we just slow things down. And we actually had to take an intermission this Christmas and go get something to eat. So it's not like there's that many presents for everybody, but there's so many of us now that it's like, okay, intermission.
That's funny. So, yeah, we my wife's family, my in-laws there, we did the kids presents first, and then after the kids went to bed, then we did the adult presents, because it was so much time, because the family's growing so much, and that was kind of fun, to have that intermission in there and to watch the kids actually play with their toys and things like that. It kind of slowed it down and was fun that way.
Yeah, it makes it more fun, and so then so just after Christmas, then I had to run a truck out to down to Houston, and then I had to go to Florida and pick up another one and run it over to Alabama. So I got home New Year's Eve, and so it was just, this whole holiday season has just been crazy for me and stuff. So okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started where we left off last week, or the last episode. Last episode we were talking about what hath God wrought, and we were talking about how God had promised that he would make Israel a great nation. And the last section that I discussed on here was talking about Samuel Morse and his invention of the telegraph and how it dramatically affected America in future generations and stuff, and really has brought us to the point where we are now, really, for better or for worse. And you were talking while we were taking a little bit of a break here, we were talking about John Quincy Adams, and you were talking about his diary, and I'd like you to kind of share that a little bit.
Yeah, so John Quincy Adams, first of all, he's my favorite president, or one of my absolute favorite founding era, because he's really a founding son more than he is a founding father. But he was an avid diary taker, I guess, or however you'd say that. If I were him, I would have chosen a more manly word like journal, but that was the era. They said diary. And actually his dad, John Adams, our second president, really encouraged him to make a diary. And his diary has several volumes, and he had, I think it was 26 straight years without missing an entry. I mean, it was something ridiculous like that. And for Christmas, I got his diary. Now, it's not the whole thing. It's select entries because it'd be several volumes, of course. In fact, I think that they're still, actually historians are still going through his diary, trying to get it all out and everything like that from last I knew. But he was one of the greatest statesmen I think that we ever had. And interestingly, he's known for having the highest IQ, and he was a brilliant guy. I think he was a diplomat to France by the age of 14 or something to that effect. I mean, very young. Pretty much his entire life, grew up as a statesman, and his entire career was a statesman. Interestingly, he was elected. And this is something that we can kind of make a segue into if you want to kind of what's current events, what's going on. His one term as president, he had less popular votes and actually less electoral college votes than Andrew Jackson. And yet he was elected. And basically how it went was there was a three-way split, and I'm trying to think of the guy's name who was the other person there. He was known as the Great Compromiser, and he had just an incredible quote. He said, "I'd rather be right than president," when he stood up against slavery. Henry Clay.
Oh, okay.
Henry Clay. By the Great Compromiser, that's not like we think of that a lot of times as a bad thing. The idea was that he was really good at striking deals in the legislative branch, as he was the Speaker of the House for a long time. But basically what happened was Henry Clay despised Andrew Jackson so much that he gave his electoral votes and whatnot and convinced everybody to go and to vote for John Quincy Adams. Or actually, I think it was basically what they were trying to get Pence to do yesterday. What they would go and have, each state has one vote from the House of Representatives. And him being the former Speaker of the House, or maybe it might have been the current Speaker of the House at the time, he had a lot of influence there. And so he got everybody to vote for John Quincy Adams above Andrew Jackson. And this caused an incredible rift between Andrew Jackson, who felt that he didn't have the majority of the popular vote, but he had the most vote, and he didn't have the majority electoral college, but he had more than everyone else. He felt that the election was stolen from him. And basically, they infiltrated then all of the political realm. And John Quincy Adams, though he's one of my favorite political heroes and things like that, he accomplished nothing as president. In fact, he was known to go and in one biography I was reading, when he was president, he would often go and spend hours swimming and doing different things like that because he could accomplish nothing. Because the legislative branch would block anything that he wanted to do. There was nothing this guy could accomplish. Now, he ended up going back into politics after he left the White House. And one of the things he was known for being was the hellhound of abolition. There was a gag order on the abolition of slavery. You couldn't go and bring this up. And in fact, originally, I believe in the Constitution, it was, I think it couldn't be brought up for 20 years after the Constitution was ratified, was basically how that worked. And he kept bringing it up, though. And somebody asked him, why do you keep bringing this up? It's going to get voted down. You're just going to be told no. And his response was, duty is ours, results are God's. And that's a quote I think we should all live by, is that we're responsible to do things, but God's responsible to bring it forth the results, or to bring forth the fruit. Right. One of the fruit of John Quincy Adams was he was able, his last term in the Senate, was able to disciple a young senator named Abraham Lincoln. Wow. So really? I think it paid off for him.
Yeah, it did. And going back to what we were talking about, or you mentioned it a little bit earlier, the events of yesterday and the supposed Trumpers, and I want everybody to understand, I'm not a Trump supporter, not a Biden supporter. I actually voted third party because I really don't like either one of them. But
I'm an Exodus 1821 guy too.
because neither one of them are conservative enough for me. And it's not that, you know, Trump didn't do a fairly decent job in some areas. I think he did, but I'm much more conservative than that. And I think we need to go further back to the foundation of America. But one thing that I want people to be aware of, something that I've been doing some research on over the last little while here, is in particular the AI technology and or the photoshopping and all these different things, and how you can actually, people need to be really aware and really cognizant and really careful of who they're listening to, what they're listening to, especially when it comes to the mainstream media and stuff, because the mainstream media has,
I wouldn't listen to any of them.
yeah, they have a definite agenda. And I think that it's really important that we understand that we live in a time and a day and an age where technology has so far advanced. And I'm not trying to be a conspiracy theorist. This is just the facts of the matter, that we have taken technology so far that we can make it look like on video that people have done stuff that they've said, or done stuff or said stuff, and we can totally, the media can literally manipulate the video so far. You know, we used to have the expression that photos don't lie or whatever, but we can't say that anymore. And so I think that people really need to be aware and cognizant of this, and that photos can be manipulated, because we've taken them off of the film and into the digital arena. And because we're in the digital arena now, they can be so far manipulated that whether they were Trumpers or not, I don't know. Whether they were Antifa or not, I don't know. But what I am saying is, I think that we need to not be so quick to rush to judgment, and actually do some digging, do some research, and find out who was this really.
Yeah. And one thing that I think is really important too to look at, and this is something I don't really listen to a whole lot of mainstream media, but last night after everything happened, and this isn't mainstream, but I guess I turned on C-SPAN and was watching the actual debates. And one thing I heard repeatedly, and you saw this from Vice President Pence, and lots of stuff, they came out and they said, violence is never the answer. Violence is never the answer. Violence is never the answer. The one that really ticked me off was I went over to Blaze TV and Glenn Beck, and I understand Glenn Beck's not a Christian, but he is a conservative, but he was losing his mind, claiming that violence is never the answer, and this is terrible, and all this and that. And several people refer to the fact that senators refer to this fact, and representatives, and all this, that this was un-American. Violence is un-American. And I'm going, first of all, do you guys not understand? There was violence in the war. It wasn't a metaphorical thing as to what happened. There was violence. And actually within the biblical worldview, violence is permitted and even commanded at times. And then when we're looking at this, and I'm going, our government, people may not like to hear this. That's okay. We're here to tell the truth. Okay. Right. Our government deserves violence for some of the things that they have done. Now it becomes a double-edged sword when we realize that our government is by the people and of the people and for the people, of course, too. So that means we, the people, deserve violence upon us. We hold some of that judgment that is deserved to come upon us. But here was the issue that I see yesterday. The perceived motivation was not for a just reason as to why any violence happened. They weren't sitting out there saying, "You've murdered 65 million babies. We we demand retribution. We demand by man's blood shall be shed," as it talks about in Genesis 9:6. There wasn't any of that. It wasn't the fact of property was taken. It wasn't the fact that this has happened or that has happened. And there's many things we could point to within our government where, they deserve violence to come upon them because they've acted wickedly. It was at best premature for them saying that the election had been stolen before the election had even been certified. And we could get into the fact of whether or not the election was stolen, whether or not all this and that happened. I mean, we could get into all this and that. But yesterday, at the time when the violence happened, and that being the perceived reason,
Mm-hmm.
whether it was Antifa starting it and getting a bunch of, Trump people rallied up, or whether it was actual
Mm-hmm.
Trump people going and causing the violence, or whatever it was. We don't know what the story was.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it was premature. And so
Mm-hmm.
even though violence is okay at right times,
Mm-hmm.
and even though our government does deserve violence,
Mm-hmm.
it still makes those actions wrong.
Right.
At least that's my position.
Right. And a couple things, a couple thoughts strike me while you're talking about that, because I just finished, while I was out on one of these trips, I like to either put in videos or listen to audiobooks or whatever, and so and listen to them while I'm going down the road, and I was listening to Rabbi Jonathan Cahn's book, Harbinger 2. I've already heard the original Harbinger, but the Harbinger 2, and he talks about a lot of these things, and he wrote this book this year, and I know that Judd and one of the other guys, Art Figueroa from church, were out in D.C. when they had the
Trump rally.
no, not the Trump rally, the
prayer, the
big prayer rally thing.
that
And
Franklin Grant headed up.
Yeah, and they were saying that they didn't hear anything about repentance, but Rabbi Jonathan Cahn actually, throughout the book, talks about repentance, and that's one of the things that he hammers on throughout the book is repent. And but it's interesting because you're talking about how our government deserves violence, and in our nation, because our government is for the people, by the people, of the people. Like you said, we have the blood of 65 plus million babies on our hands. And it was really interesting because this Rabbi Jonathan Cahn's talking through this book. He talks about there's something in Jewish culture called the Jubilee year. Mm-hmm. And the Jubilee year happens every 50 years. You have a cycle of every 7 years, you have a Sabbath year. And so for 6 years you work. The seventh year you let the land rest. Mm-hmm. And that's supposed to happen every 7 years. Well, that means you end up with the cycle of 49 years. So the 49th year, though, then there's an extra year on there called the Jubilee year. And again, the land's supposed to rest. But the Jubilee year is a year of, it's supposed to be a blessing, but it can also be a curse. Okay. It's as with anything in the Bible, a blessing can always turn into a curse. There's always two sides of the same coin.
Well, it's like the gospel not only gives people the opportunity to get out of condemnation, it also, if they reject it, puts them in condemnation.
Right, exactly.
Or more condemnation upon them, I should say.
Right. And so one of the things that he's talking about throughout this book is he's talking about the Jubilee year, so the Jubilee year is a year where if I sold land to you, I would sell it to you for a set number of a set amount of time until the Jubilee year, and we would calculate the value of that land based on the time up until the Jubilee. At the end of the Jubilee, or at the Jubilee rather, that land was supposed to revert back to me because it was supposed to be my family's inheritance for the generations. Mm-hmm. And so God did this because he said, you had the 12 tribes and they're like, okay, this is our inheritance. That inheritance was supposed to be throughout the generations. But so the idea of the Jubilee is that whatever is taken shall be returned. 1970, what a lot of people don't realize, we think of abortion as happening in 1973. Abortion actually entered America in 1970 in New York State. And imagine that. Yeah, imagine that. But it also happened in another town. So it happened in New York State, but then it also started in 1970 in Seattle, Washington. And he goes through and imagine that. And he takes you through a whole litany of things. I mean, I'm condensing like 38 chapters of stuff down into like just okay, so you need to read the book. It's really, really good. But one of the things he talks about is New York State has historically been the ground of consecration. New York City, was the original capital of the United States, not Washington, D.C. New York City is the town where when Washington took office and he and Congress went down to a little stone chapel named St. Paul's Chapel. They went down to this chapel and dedicated America to God on the first day of his presidency. The day that he became president, they went down to this little stone chapel. In that little stone chapel is still standing to this day. It also happens to be right next door to Ground Zero. So when the Twin Towers came down, there was a steel beam that came down and struck a tree in the backyard of St. Paul's Chapel and protected the building. That tree was a sycamore tree. And it's really interesting because the day after 9/11, Tom Daschle gets up on the steps of the Capitol building in a joint session, and he starts declaring how America is going to come back and we're going to rebuild and all these different things. And he gets up and he quotes the most obscure verse, or one of the most obscure verses in the Bible. And he gets up and he quotes Isaiah 9, 10, and 11. And Isaiah 9, 10, and 11 says, the bricks are falling down, but we will rebuild with hewn stones. The sycamores are cut down, but we will replant with the cedars of Lebanon, or we will replant with cedars. And he gets up and he quotes this verse, but what he doesn't tell you is the previous verses to this are where God is saying, through Isaiah the prophet, he's saying, because Israel has said thus and such, I am bringing judgment upon Israel. And I think I said Israel, because Israel has said thus and such. This is the reason I'm bringing judgment upon Israel, because Israel did not humble themselves and repent. They turned around and said, oh, they knocked the bricks down. We will rebuild with hewn stones. We'll come back stronger. We'll build back better. We'll build back stronger. How many times have you heard those phrases in the last year?
A lot.
20 years. Yeah. And so Tom Daschle gets up and he starts quoting this verse, but what he's doing is he's actually declaring
a curse
upon America. And it's interesting because then Rabbi Jonathan Kahn takes you through and he shows you when the Twin Towers came down and they got all the mess cleaned up, they went down to Ground Zero and they built the Freedom Tower. And the very first stone that they laid, or the very first thing that they laid into that hole when they started rebuilding the Freedom Tower, was a hewn stone from the Allegheny Mountains that they had gone up and they had cut. And they spoke that verse, Isaiah 9, 10, and 11, over that stone as they were building the tower. When they got to the top of the tower, President Obama signed a beam, the highest beam in that tower, and wrote Isaiah 9. He paraphrased it, but Rabbi Kahn talks about it. He says, if you look at the original Hebrew, it takes 8 words to say that phrase. The bricks are falling down. It takes 8 words to make up that phrase. And if you look at what he wrote on the top beam on the tower, it's 8 words. It's just amazing all the way through. But then he talks about how 2020 was the 50th anniversary of New York, the state that's the ground of consecration. New York City in particular has ties to the ground of consecration because Henry Hudson went up the river, and as he went up the river, he got to New York City, or where New York City was to be, and he got off, established a trading post there, and dedicated it to God, and said, this is, prayed over this area and dedicated it to God. And that trading post sits down in the area where the trade centers were. This whole area has been dedicated to God. And so the ground of consecration has become the ground of desecration. And so he talks about how 50 years ago, New York State declared that we're going to allow abortions, and New York State became the mecca for 3 years for legal abortion in the United States. If you needed an abortion, you went to New York State for 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
But it also came in through Seattle, Washington in 1970. What two places, where did the COVID virus come into the United States?
New
Seattle,
York and Washington.
Well, it came in through Seattle. That was the first case on January 22nd was where it came in through. And that date in the book is extremely important too. January 22nd, September 11th is really important too in the book. So both of these dates have historical ties. But New York State, a year ago, decided on April 9th and 10th that they were going to, the House voted on the 9th, and I think the Senate, I may have those backwards, but the House voted on the 9th to approve the partial birth abortion. And then a day later, the Senate voted to approve partial birth abortion. And a year later, if you look at the numbers from COVID on April 9th and 10th in New York State, those are the two highest days of recorded deaths from COVID in the state of New York. April 9th and 10th, a year later, all tying back to abortion. And I don't want to ruin the whole book, but there's a lot more to it. But it's just interesting to see how, and as he said, the Jubilee can be a blessing, but it can also be a curse. And so now 50 years later, here we are, and all those lives are at some point going to be accounted for. Because God talks about it throughout the scriptures, and we're looking at it in the Old Testament. He says, the land is cursed because of the innocent blood that has been shed upon the land. Well, we have 65 million innocent babies that have been aborted on American soil. And, I got into a little discussion with somebody here. It was earlier this last summer. And she was a Jewish lady, fellow podcaster and stuff. And we were talking, and she said, we and she's a secular Jew, so bear that in mind. But she's like, we don't believe that humans are humans until they're born, because we don't believe that the spirit goes into the man until they're born.
Until the first breath. Yeah.
Well, I would counteract that, and I would give a biblical example of it. When Elizabeth was 6 months pregnant with John the Baptist, and Mary shows up at her house, what did it say the baby did?
Leapt within the womb.
Leapt within the womb. So if that baby inside of Elizabeth knew and recognized the Savior of the world from across the room, and he heard Mary's voice and he went, oh, he's here, and he leapt within Elizabeth's womb, then does the spirit of man really enter the baby when it's born? Or does it enter when it's conceived?
Right, because that speaks to personhood there. And obviously we could go to Jeremiah, where God tells Jeremiah that he knew him before he was born, or before he was in his mother's womb. And so I spend a lot of time out at Planned Parenthoods every week. Not a lot of time, but try to get out there at least once a week to preach, pray, and plead. And I'm so proud that that's alliterated. And the big thing that I do is, or one of the big things that I do is I read Psalm 139, and this is David. And David says, you formed me in my mother's womb. And he says, and you knew basically these things that was going to happen, and had them written down even. And so, there's a distinct personhood that's there before that first breath comes in. And so even from the Old Testament, it's pretty easy to counteract that idea, but they get that doctrine from Genesis 2, where it talks about that the Lord breathed into Adam the breath of life, which I would also point out that Adam wasn't born, so that was a little bit of a different scenario.
Yeah, quite a bit different scenario. Exactly.
Yeah. Did Adam have a belly button? I don't know. Well,
but he was the prototype of man, so.
Yeah, God got done. He went, Doop.
Boop. Exactly. Exactly. You know, and this speaks to the value of human life. God values human life so much that he says, you know what? I know that your nation was founded upon me, but you have gone to devaluing human life so much that I have to bring judgment upon your nation. And you know what? So far it has been an indiscriminate, a fairly indiscriminate um, uh, judgment, but not judgment based on God's judgment can be such a thing that it's just him removing his hand and allowing the enemy to come in. And that's what I believe we're seeing, is that he's removed his hand and the enemy's coming in, and then it's a non-specific judgment. In other words, it falls on all of us.
Yeah, well, and I mean, basically what you talk about is basically like the sin of bitterness. When it talks about the unjust steward, he was given over to his tormentors. You know, that's kind of what's going on. But if you want to look at an interesting parallel in Deuteronomy 28, it really goes and it lists out, if you don't obey the law, God says to Israel, then these curses will be upon you. And it starts off, the first curse is your cities will be cursed. And then it goes into the country. But I mean, if you look at it, I think our cities are pretty cursed. I had somebody who called me up a few months ago, and they were seeking advice. They saw our nation is going the wrong way, and they said, what should I do? And they live in a metropolis area. And I just said, well, the first thing you need to do is move. And they laughed at me because they thought I was joking. And I'm going, no, this won't mitigate everything, but people who are in cities, you're in for a rough, rude awakening. If you haven't already had that, just ask the people in Minneapolis, ask the people in Washington, D.C., ask it in Seattle, Portland, New York City, Chicago. It's very much a cursed place right now to live within the cities. And if you go and you break it down, almost all of them, you can go and look at whether it's pestilence, the killing of animals for no reason. Some of the other curses were giving basically madness. And I mean, you could see we live in a time when mental illness and madness is just ripe amongst people. And so I would agree with you. It's an unspecific judgment, but whenever you abandon the laws of God, I think these types of judgments do come upon you as a nation.
Yeah. And you know, why would it come upon cities more than per se in the country? And I think that this goes back to the simple fact that you have the highest concentration of innocent blood being shed in the cities.
I'll be honest, the only thing that's going through my mind right now is "Thank God I'm a Country Boy" song. But
exactly. You know,
I can't play the fiddle though.
Well, my wife can, but yeah. So I understand. So you know, let's get into John Adams here a little bit, well,
I just got an update, and I just got to mention this because this is just insane. As we mentioned, neither me or Brad are Trump supporters. Okay, we're I guess you could say we're Trump supporters in the sense that, you know, we want him to be successful, but our support is calling him to repentance for the most part.
Right.
Not people who voted for Trump. You voted third party. I voted for somebody who wasn't even running for president, so some people might think that was bad, but I thought he was the most qualified man for the job.
There you go. Why, thank you.
Went ahead. Yeah. I was gonna say I did write myself in, but no, I'm not old enough to run for president. Judge Roy Moore. Judge Roy Moore.
There you go.
Put down, yep. So, anyway, just got a news update. Just in, Facebook will bar President Donald Trump from posting on its system at least until the inauguration of President-elect Joe Biden. And I just want to point this out. This is terribly bad news, because if they can censor the president of the United States, they will censor you. And think about this. They try to make President Trump sound like he is this crazy, wild, insane, crazy whatever adjective you want to put in there, conservative.
Mm-hmm.
Donald Trump is a 1990s Democrat.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. At best. He's, in fact, I've honestly debated and argued with people saying you can make a legitimate case that Donald Trump is the most liberal president action-wise that we've ever had. More money's gone to Planned Parenthood in the time that President Trump is there. There's been more advancement in the LGBTQ movement. The greatest stimulus package ever known to mankind in the history of mankind. The greatest redistribution of wealth happened on President Donald Trump's watch with his signature. Okay. And I know I'm ticking off all of the Trumpites out there. Okay. Just bear with me. I understand that directionally he is less liberal than Obama or Clinton. I understand that. But I'm just saying, if you go and you look at the accomplishments or what's happened in his presidency, you can make the case that he has acted the most liberal. I get directionally he's not, and he has put some breaks up and he's done some good things, and I praise him when he does good, and I call him to repentance when he does bad. That's my position. I'm not bashing on Trump here unnecessarily. My point here with this is that if somebody who is much less conservative than mainstream evangelicalism, which is, and maybe I'm getting a little wishy-washy there because mainstream evangelicalism has really gone liberal here recently, but if they can completely censor somebody like that, give it a few years, we are going to be completely kicked off of social media, or at least Facebook and Twitter. We might have to all go back and join MySpace. I don't know. But this is something that's very bad, and it's very bad for our republic. I mean, our nation is in a terrible place because this is evil. This is evil to muzzle somebody like that, and especially somebody who is still the president of the United States. I mean, this would be bad if they did this to Joe Biden. This would have been bad if they'd done this to Barack Obama. And this is terrible that they're doing this to Donald Trump. I'm just at a loss for words because basically what we're seeing is that we're a nation of technocrats in a new oligarchy and aristocracy. And just even in hearing, especially the Democrats and the wishy-washy Republicans speak last night, they spoke down to the people. They believe that they are above us. They are no longer public servants. They believe that they are our elitists who are above us. We are ripe in a need for a revolution. The problem is, and I'm sorry to kind of go on a soliloquy here, but I was just reading this morning. I've got a volume of political sermons from the founding era. It's awesome. But I started reading this one, and I didn't get very far into it here this morning before I had to put it away, and I'm planning on finishing it today. But it's titled "The Bible and the Sword," and I was like, "Ooh, this is going to be interesting for the time that we're in." But I was shocked to find out this was preached by a British pastor in England, in London. I'm going, what? What is this? But you know what he starts off with is basically this premise, and this is as far as I've gotten, so I don't know his conclusion yet. But his premise is that Britain is in trouble because the United States was fasting and praying and beseeching God in 1776. And they were, in his words, at the gaming table, and instead of fasting, they were filling their bellies with alcohol and all this kind of stuff. They were gambling. They were feasting. They were ignoring God's laws. He goes and he points out in all this stuff, and he goes and he says it doesn't matter that we are bigger, stronger, more powerful than the United States if they have God on their side. We're ripe for a revolution, and that's the revolution that we need. Is the 1776 one where we're beseeching God, we're repenting, and we're fasting, and we're praying. Unfortunately, if we do have a revolution, unless something changes, it is going to be a French Revolution that leads to the guillotine, is what it led to the French Revolution. It might be a different instrument, but it leads to a bloody revolution that ends in tyrants' chains. That's where the United States is heading if things don't change. But I thought it was just fascinating to see. And by the way, this This pastor was firmly on the side of Britain too. He was saying that he believed that that the king's decrees were just, but he saw the culture of the people and said, "We're not doing what we're supposed to be doing in the United States." Though he disagreed with their premise, they were beseeching God, and so he was going, "Wow, we're in trouble." I'm sorry to derail us from looking at John Quincy Adams. But I just saw that come over my phone, and I'm going, "Oh man, we're in dire straits in the United States right now."
Well, and you know, I had a friend of mine that made a comment this morning on Facebook, and I don't remember exactly what his comment was, but he was talking about and I'm going to quote unquote air quote the supposed Trump supporters, because like I said, there's reports that they were Antifa, whatever, whoever it was.
This is what I would say. It was a highly volatile situation, no matter what. Lots of energy, lots of frustration. It's very likely, I think, that Antifa supporters started it, but there were Trump supporters who stormed the Capitol. I mean, we can't get around that fact. The lady who got shot was obviously a Trump supporter. She wasn't Antifa. Right.
And I'm not making, I'm not letting anybody off the hook either way, size, shape, or form. But he was talking about how he said, he saw a sign that said something about Jesus, and somebody else commented, "Yeah, I saw that too." And he's like, "That in no way reflects Christianity," and he's right. But I said to him, I made the reply. I said, this friend of mine is a pastor's kid. And he's gone more liberal over the years. I've watched him go more liberal over the years. He moved out to the Massachusetts, New York area from here in Iowa and stuff. And so I've seen him go more liberal over the years. But the thing that I said is, I said that sign is actually right. Ironically, they're holding it up and they're saying "No Jesus, no peace," and it was "N-O Jesus, N-O peace." And I said, that sign is actually right, because we have removed Christ from the public square. We have removed him from our churches. We've removed him from the schoolhouse. We've removed him from all these different areas. So no, we're not going to have peace. We can't, because he is called the King of Peace. I mean, I have one of those 1990s framed pictures in my office that says, "And he shall be called," and it has all the names of Christ, the Prince of Peace, the Lord of Hosts, and the chief cornerstone, and all the bridegroom, and all these different ones. And I said, of course we're not going to have peace. We can't, because we've removed Christ, we removed God from the public square. So when you remove the Prince of Peace, the only thing you're going to have is the absence of peace.
Right.
And, so you don't get anything else. So, so let's go ahead and read John Quincy Adams here, and we'll probably wrap up here and get into this in the next episode.
Do you want me to read it, or you want to read it?
You can go ahead and read it.
Oh boy, you're assuming I can read. Here we go. The son of John and Abigail Adams, at the age of 8, John Quincy marched with the famous Massachusetts Minutemen in their various musket drills and watched the British attacks at Charlestown and Bunker Hill. At the age of 10, he accompanied his father as secretary on a diplomatic mission to France. At 14, he was secretary and French interpreter for the American ambassador to Russia. And at 16, secretary to the American commissioners in France who were negotiating the peace treaty to end the American Revolution. He returned home to attend Harvard and became an attorney. He served in many government positions before becoming the 6th president of the United States, and afterwards served the remainder of his life in the U.S. House of Representatives. He became known as the Hellhound of Abolition for his intense opposition to slavery, and Old Man Eloquent for his moving defense of the anti-slavery cause.
I just look at this. So he's marching with the Minutemen at 8 years old. How many American 8-year-olds do you know today that you'd ever see out there? How far have we gone down the rabbit hole? We've gone.
Well, I think it was John Trumbull, one of the signers to the Declaration of Independence who read through the Bible, and I have it written in the front of my Bible, one of my Bibles. I can't remember if it was age 3 or 4, but either one, you know, he had read through the Bible at age 3 or 4. I mean, when I was 3 or 4, I couldn't read. Maybe it was age 7, but it was I think it was 3 or 4. And I mean, it's one of those wow kind of a things. I wrote it down in the front of my Bible because it's one of those things, and it's a Bible. Let me see here if I have it right up there. I was going to say, I think it's at home. It's not on my shelf right now. But it's one of those things I wrote down because it's humbling. Mm-hmm. You know, I couldn't read Brown Bear at that age, and he's reading through the Bible. Mm-hmm. We have absolutely decayed as a nation. And you know, our standards are so low. Right now we've got our son's 2 years old at home, and it's easy to kind of just sell it short because, you know, lower the standard. Well, the other day we're reading a book with him, and at the end of the book, it has the alphabet listed out. And he normally points to it and I say what letter it is. He likes to point, and I think he's not getting anything. And then I tell him, point to O. I just wanted to see what would happen. And he pointed to the O. And I said, point to the A. And he pointed to the A. And then I said, point to another letter. And then he pointed to all of them. But, but he did recognize O and A, and we came back and he did it again too, but he lost his attention span in there for a little bit. And I'm not trying to say this as like our kid's a brainiac or anything like that, but it made me realize we can take the next step in teaching him how to read. And he might be able to read by the time he's 3. And if he's able to read by the time he's 3, why wouldn't we have him reading the Word of God?
Right. You know, and I hear stories like that, and it makes me, you know, even though we homeschool and we work very diligently to put the Word of God into our kids, you know, even for me, it's like, I'm a failure, you know, so you feel like, well, crap, I'm failing as a parent, you know? So,
well, I wouldn't say that. I mean, you've got that nice mug, so, but yeah, I mean, John Quincy Adams, I was reading a quote from John Quincy Adams, and you know, a lot of people like to bash on the Adams family, and no, not the one that not that one, the one this one, because John Adams, his father, probably through the convincing of Thomas Jefferson, left some Orthodox Christian views later on in his life. And so they like to use that and really bash on him. And John Adams wasn't per se the strongest Christian during the Revolution, although I would argue through his letters to Abigail Adams that he was a fine theologian and he understood very well. But John Quincy Adams was writing, I was reading a quote from him, and I think it was one of his journal entries, but he was talking about the different versions of the Bible. And I'm going, let's talk about different versions of the Bible. You know, 1611, King James would have been the only one, or the only popular one at the time anyway. And then come to find out, he lists 4 or 5 different languages, like German, Latin, Greek, Hebrew, you know, all these different languages. And that's what he meant by versions of the Bible. He was reading different translations in different languages of the Bible. And I'm just going, wow, that makes me feel stupid. You know?
Yeah. I have a hard enough time with the English one, let alone getting into the Hebrew or anything. So
yeah, I'm still mastering Americanese, and then I'm going to go on to English. So,
well, so we're going to wrap up here, but before we go, I want to talk about Teshua Tea Company a little bit, and you know, we were
talking
about
the purpose, and we didn't touch on it.
Yeah, so you know, we were talking about personhood, and we were talking about the value of human life and stuff, and that's really what we're doing with Teshua Tea Company and the girls that we're working to rescue and get out of the sex trafficking and the sex trade. Girls that are not there by choice, girls that are, you know, were kidnapped and sold into slavery and stuff. And so for those of you that have not heard a previous episode, my business partner, Andrew, is a missionary in communist Asia, and he and the team rescue underage girls out of sex trafficking. And they get the girls under our rescue and rehab facility and teach the girls how to make bracelets and coasters and harvest and process tea and coffee and stuff, and world-class teas and coffees. This is coming off of some fantastic tea and coffee farms. And So we bring those or buy those products from the girls up front, so they have economic empowerment when we're bringing it stateside to sell over here, so that they have, or then we're able to take those profits that we're making and we're able to send half of it back to the rescue facility. So we're working really diligently to do that, and we had a really good Christmas season. You know, people came in and bought more product and stuff, but understand that I have the product on hand. It's already been paid for. And as we sell the product, then we're able to rebuy more from the girls. So for those of you that are just joining us and are longtime listeners, please stop by teshuatea.com. So that's TESHUAHTEA.com or deliverancetea.com. Again, deliverancetea.com. And stop by and pick up some of the product and show your support for the girls and help us continue on in 2021 and make this a good year so that we can help rescue more girls. So we've been able to rescue Amen. 63 so far.
Amen.
4 of the girls that came to us were pregnant when they came to us, and of those 4, 3 of the 4 have chosen to keep their babies. So we're making a real difference, even in the next generation and stuff. So I'm excited about what's coming for the girls. I'm excited for what's coming in 2021. I know that sounds weird, but you know, God is still on the throne, and in spite of all the judgment and all the things that are coming to America and in the world, you know, I believe He's still on the throne and is going to see us through. So God bless and have a wonderful week, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to the Liberty Unveiled podcast, setting captives free one episode at a time. The Liberty Unveiled podcast is a part of the Unresolved Podcast Network and has been brought to you by Teshua Tea Company, TESHUAHTEA.com or deliverancetea.com.